Hey, Kleko here. I help people stop their existential pain. And all this work really boils down to one core feeling, which most people feel. And it's the wish to die. Wanting to die is a desire we all carry inside of us. And we don't speak out loud. And I know this isn't rare at all. You don't need to be depressed for it. You don't even need to be that unhappy for it. There's a difference between wanting to die and straight up suicidality. These two ideas flirt with each other, but one is more like a loose desire, like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have to wake up tomorrow. And the other is a serious pull, like you're being pulled to end your life more immediately. So, and then it becomes more of an emergency, right? Where you can call a hotline or have to confine to a friend because you're actually in immediate danger. But for most people, this is not how this desire presents itself. It's more unconscious. It's silent almost. But this slow hanging feeling of, I actually kind of prefer not to exist. Almost all seekers who go deep into this existential rabbit hole to find themselves or find the truth of the universe have been moved by this desire to die. Because death sounds like peace. And being alive, for most, is not peaceful. More so, it might seem that peace is generally impossible while you're being alive. Because when you project your future, you always know that you're going to feel physical pain, you're going to see other people die, you are confronted with a huge amount of work that just keeps repeating every single day. So when there's some energy there that resists all of this, that just thinks, hey, I haven't signed up for this, well, then every day becomes torturous. And there's this consistent resistance for life. This idea that therefore peace is an impossibility and that real peace can only be found in death is where this wish to die comes from. And these conversations are so hard to have because you never want to say something that would encourage somebody to take their own life. It's just not a nice thing to talk about because it really connects with something so dark about us and so real about us too. If you have had any suicides in your life, you know how deeply intrusive they are for the entire family and for generations after. They shape us into pockets of trauma we carry on forever. And if you're purely rational or logical, you could say it's just the mind or it's just evolution so that we don't do this. But the feeling feels way deeper than this. It feels spiritual. It feels existential in a way that can only be really understood once you're confronted with this. And then all the logical frameworks and the philosophy and all of this becomes silly in the face of real death. So we have a spectrum here from just having intrusive thoughts of jumping on the incoming train as some sort of morbid curiosity, or just straight up wishing that the universe didn't exist because all life was a mistake. So first I want to say that this part of you that thinks these thoughts is reasonable. It's a part of you that wants to die, that is not random. I know what it's like because it's pointing you to something very profound. It's pointing to something about the nature of how the mind and consciousness works, about the nature of life, and what it means to exist in a world without having had the choice to be here. People usually don't think about wanting to die as a violent act, but more like a wish for sudden disappearance, like being able to snap your fingers and then suddenly be gone. That's how most people envision it. People often tell me they wish to just sleep forever. That's a very common way to frame this too. That sounds much more peaceful and not as grotesque. But our bodies bind us to this physical reality. So sleeping sounds to be just like a way we can fall out of the body very easily without having to be involved in some brutal or painful physical process. Because for some, sleep is really the only moment they can feel peaceful. It's like you chronically are tired and are existentially exhausted for life. And it's this feeling that you're being forced to live your life, this feeling that life is tyrannical in some sense. That's how it feels like. Like the universe is a tyrant that forces you to live against your will. And with sober eyes for what experience is like, well, you might argue that this is just true. This is not by choice for any of us. The question becomes, who is really the tyrant, and what is this me that I claim to be the victim? What is so noticeable about this exhaustion is that your life on paper might not even be that bad, but it's your own mind that is exhausting you. It's like you're tired of yourself ultimately, of how you feel like you need to do what your mind says or what other people tell you to do, or all of the negativity of this current culture or the people around you just feeling like they're dragging you down and just kind of want to block it all out and crawl into your own little bubble. Under these circumstances, it becomes very hard to enjoy even normal people or just very casual conversations, because everything feels so superficial when this existential exhaustion is yearning underneath. Then all life becomes dull and boring, because even when things are somewhat okay, it just is not okay in the context of everything else. It's hard to come forth with these feelings because they are mostly pathologized. You're made to be sick. But to a certain degree, some level of death wish is normal for most humans. The question is, how intense is it, and what is the cause of it? Because just because it's normal in our current day society doesn't mean that you have to live like this. And it doesn't mean that there is not another way to experience life. And you must wonder why we are living like this right now. Like, isn't this odd that we are here in the most technologically advanced times, and mental health wise, we are completely falling apart? This must mean that there is some truth here that we are collectively missing. That there's a way to perceive life and perceive existence that truly shifts something for the better. Something that is healthier and more natural for a human to be like. So you might say that this unsatisfactoriness is a signal deep inside our brains that is humming the tune that tries to say that something is deeply wrong. Maybe not just with you, but with society as a whole, with the patterns that we have collectively created. Underneath this desire for death is usually also a desire for a connection, a deep yearning to be one with something or be made whole with somebody. But then when you look at the passing of time, when you look at how you're always kind of stuck in your own mind and you can never really be one with another person, like really, as long as you're in the body, then there's this feeling of existential loneliness that becomes overwhelming and all-consuming, because it seems so inevitable. Like there's no way you could not feel lonely because time kills it all, and yeah, I'm stuck being myself. I'm stuck in my own head. So then again, the idea that the only way to get rid of this feeling of loneliness must be to actually cease to exist. And it's a mistake that the mind makes, but it's a reasonable mistake, right? Because you've maybe lived with this feeling for who knows how long. And then, yeah, you're convinced that the only way out of this feeling is to cease, which ironically would be way lonelier. But a certain degree of loneliness in waking life must be accepted, because how is one supposed to mend the distance between your life and another? It's not possible. You will always be you, but what you is what can change. Often these feelings of existential loneliness or wishing to cease come in waves. Like something might trigger the emotional load to overflow, like some small thing in reality that actually shouldn't be that big of a deal, like you think to yourself, but then it triggers something, and then there's this burst of existential loneliness or longing, and there is suddenly a negative filter that becomes visible on everything. Like you're just seeing the dullness in ordinary life once you get into this certain funk. At least I know that this is how it was like for me. We have this idea of a good life and we want to kind of aim for that, and we think about all the ways that we are inadequate and don't really live for our potential, and then we try to like focus on this potential and beat each other up for not reaching this abstract idea of potential. But a good life doesn't care about circumstances. It only cares about your mental health. They don't just strongly relate, but they are in a way the only thing that matters. If you're in a good mental space, you're just content to be there and you're happy. And you know as well as I do that there are plenty of rich and famous people who have been severely depressed because one thing has nothing to do with the other. Like your life circumstances and your actual mental health don't have actually that much to do with each other. It's mostly that the life circumstances you've been born into from childhood or the way you've been growing up is what shapes you into what you are. And often what you lack is the belief that you can actually shift this or change this. There's this belief that you cannot change because you've been formed by your past. And ideas of determinism and rigid materialism often perpetuate this idea that there's no way to actually have some freedom to actually change how you perceive life. And when you beat yourself up often enough, then the deepest emotional hole that you can fall into is that of shame. Shame and suicidality are super interconnected because shame is the idea that you're truly not worth existing, like that you should somehow be ashamed to be alive. But there is no shame in shame. There's no shame in living a technically good life and feeling like shit. It's truly okay to feel how you're feeling, even if these are very, shameful emotions. The worst experience of my life was in the year 2021. It was a nightmare psychedelic trip that, almost cost me my life. Mentally, before I went into this trip, I was somewhat better than years prior. For me, it was always like an up and down between phases of intense melancholy and depression and just feeling kind of okay. But I remember that this day or this week, I thought a lot about suffering as some abstract thing. Like, why is there so much suffering in the world? Why does it all exist? Isn't it crazy that we are alive and are just forced to experience these things? And well, when I then took psychedelics this day, I experienced the worst suffering that I could have possibly ever imagined. Like if the worst experience of my life was a 10 out of 10 by this point, this went into the multiple 100,000s. Like there's no comparison. And when it started to hit me, then I had this thought, I need to jump off the balcony. There's no way I can possibly endure this experience. This is too horrible to be accepted. And more so than just this experience to be too horrible to be accepted, I thought, if this experience is possible, then I know with 100% certainty that the universe was a mistake. This is how it felt like. Like this should not be possible. It should not be allowed to feel this awful. And I remember these intense spikes of emotions where I first had intense fear, where I was sweating. I needed to take off my clothes because I had a huge sweating attack. Like I was soaking wet. And then I suddenly got super depressed. Like from the fear, then came the depression. And the depression was so strong. And this is where I thought, oh God, I might actually lose control now. I might actually just jump off because I cannot take this anymore. And then afterwards, there was also this notion of shame and being humbled by the experience. This experience was just before an ego death. And what I did is I resisted this ego death. So this resistance is what made my ego cling on to life, cling on to experience, cling on to control. The tricky thing is, the part of me that then thought I need to jump off the balcony to end this was this desire for control. It was the ego not wanting to let go into the experience, therefore clinging and causing the suffering, and to reassert control, it said, let's jump off. So it basically tells you to deconstruct yourself physically so that you don't let go into the experience. And this is what the ego does. The ego resists life. The ego resists experience. and it will do every possible thing to control experience. And if it can't control it, and it sees how useless it is, and it's so frustrated by its own uselessness, then it thinks about ending its own life. And this lo-fi thought, this lo-fi feeling that is saying, I don't want to exist, is the ego wishing to cease. It is the ego wishing to not have to control your life anymore, to not have to tell yourself a story about how worthy you are and how you have to prove yourself to other people and how you're a piece of shit and actually worthless and shouldn't exist. So this the mechanism of true liberation is to let the ego cease without having to damage the physical body. This is what the spiritual path is. This is what the path towards freedom and liberation is. It's to find the ego and look at it honestly and let it cease. Let it go, which is to let go this need for control. To not need to be anybody anymore, and to be able to live your life without being pushed around by other people and being pushed around by your obligations or being pushed around by what you think you need to do, and to actually live freely. One day I will make a complete trip report where I give you all the details, because it really is the reason why I'm doing the work that I'm doing right now. There's nothing that has had as much of an impact in my life than my experimentation with psychedelics, except love. Love also does that. But the idea that you can control experience goes against nature. When you observe how experience actually functions and how life functions, it has this quality of flowing through things. It moves completely on its own, and it cannot be controlled. What you feel in each moment finds itself the moment you experience it. And there's not much to think about. There's not much to act upon. It does it by itself. But if you don't like that it's doing it by itself and you want to control it, then life feels so exhausting and painful. And the people that I've talked to, which are truth seekers, philosophers, or psychonauts, I've noticed this desire for death comes up in 3 different forms. There's this depression death wish, where you just can't take existing anymore, and you just see the world as a very dark place, and you want all of this to be gone forever. Under this type of death wish, when people get into spirituality and they start to see everything as one, this feeling can actually be very troublesome, because you now have the shocking revelation that even through death, existence might actually not cease. This can be very horrifying, because you thought that death might be some sort of absolution or freedom, but it might actually just be a cycle of reincarnation or just nature of infinity. And this can make it either so that, reality is looked at as even worse than before, because now what is that supposed to mean? I'm all people? Like, am I suffering for all eternity? Or it might actually motivate somebody to take their life because, well, if I could just restart as another being in another realm, well, then, let's just end it. And this is why spirituality and non-duality can cause a lot of dysfunction in the mind, where people start to believe that they have to, hurt themselves to transcend into a next realm. And it's the biggest spiritual mistake you can possibly make. Your life is way more precious than that. Then there's philosophical tiredness, where you're so obsessed with understanding reality and your place in that reality that, you just completely miss out on the meaning of life, because you're so lost in thinking and thought and rationality. So you are always looking for some aliveness in experience, but instead get exhausted by thinking. And thinking and the ego are very much correlated. You are trying to control reality to thought, and it just doesn't work. And then there's also this ego death confusion, where you have already kind of died or seen through the illusion of the self or the ego, and then you kind of know that the only thing you can do is let go, but you still are kind of stuck in it. And then you start to identify with being consciousness. And when you identify with being consciousness, that can be freeing, but it can also make you feel even more stuck, because now instead of seeing actual selflessness, you have identified with consciousness itself. And it is still ego, and you are very confident it is not. And it's very difficult to get out of it because you're basically in a constantly contracted state. This is also where spiritual ego is a term that comes into play, because you think you've seen the nature of reality, but you're actually just hyper-identified with consciousness or awareness, which is not a ground either. And then there's also this emptiness that wants to cease, where this is, I think, much more advanced, where reality feels very much empty and you already are almost not suffering anymore, or you're just kind of like maybe a bit dull, but this desire to cease to exist is very subtle. Like you're kind of fine, or you're kind of okay because you see the empty nature of reality. Like it's not this depressive emptiness anymore, but you're still not content. You still are looking for something that makes life more exciting or better than what it is, which is, yeah, this subtle dissatisfaction with life. And emptiness is very rich territory, because you might say that you feel empty and therefore you are depressed, but you can also say that you feel empty and this is where you feel free. So the same word has different connotations depending on where you are spiritually, because emptiness is freedom. The feeling that you're sensing that there's something empty about life or empty about meaning is the same pointer that wants you to find yourself, which is the groundless nature of selflessness or experience. So both this feeling of emptiness or this yearning for dissolution or this wish to die point to a deeper nature of truth that is the emptiness. But as long as within this emptiness you still find yourself depressed, you don't find yourself happy, you find yourself dull, it is not the freedom that is out there. Like you're seeing a sliver of what reality looks like, but it's still distorted by the ego. It's still distorted by something that wants to control it and make it different than what it is. But when you're truly empty, there's no suffering. There's no existential suffering with life or no argument against life anymore. The core fear beneath the desire to die is that existence truly is pointless, that there's no reason to keep going, and you want to believe that it gets better somehow, so you cope and tell yourself just, lies to keep yourself afloat. Some people hope that taking psychedelics magically solves this, but often it deepens the need to disappear, because psychedelics can be freeing, but also make it painfully obvious how the ego weighs everything down in waking life. It makes normal life look boring and dull by comparison. And if you get traumatized by psychedelics, as I gotten, well, now death itself can look even scarier than before, because who wants to go through this experience again? Ultimately, the desire to die is misidentified longing. It's the false self that wants to die. It's the ego. It's the one that creates shame, and it's stuck in old patterns of trauma. It does not want to feel the emotions and wants to control and manipulate all of reality for not having enough power over it. Since you think you are the ego, like the thoughts that you're having, narrating your life, the feelings in your body that are pulling you and controlling you, and you feel like you need to act on them, well, then you think that the only way out is to take your body with it. But that's a huge mistake. All of this can cease. The sense of self can disappear, and you are not longer haunted by these burdens anymore. It is possible, and your ego tries to convince you that it is not. It tries to convince you that you're stuck, because this is what it wants to be. Because if it's stuck, it is in full control of that experience. The ego thinks it is an individual within the body. Most people describe it as being behind their eyes or being their thoughts. And before people see the ego clearly, there's this idea that it's just a word or an abstract concept, or the body, which it is not the body. So many people in the spiritual community pretend to understand what the ego is, but then clearly don't want to look at it. They don't like to look at their own insecurities and neediness and lies, the way they manipulate people around them, or in the way they manipulate themselves. So the ego becomes this abstract concept to transcend, but it's not. It's very directly to be looked at, to be seen, and to learn how it works in your day-to-day life, by looking how you react to things, how you feel about certain things, and how you resist and try to not accept something inevitable. The process of discovering what the ego is trying to hide or protect itself from is what shadow work is, or also, just ego work or spiritual work. Shining your light on that and understanding yourself, where this construct comes from and how it has come to be this way, is what frees you. We all are looking for truth. And in a way, what we want is we want to find something transcendental. So after some time, when you feel like there's no way to get to this truth with philosophy or with just thinking or fulfilling your life with wealth and riches, well, then it starts to feel like the only way to transcend is to put the mind full of drugs or to destroy the body. But that's not the case. Transcendence happens in your own body. It happens here. The exhaustion towards existence points to sort of mismanaged identity, too much pressure towards life, towards working or finding some meaning. Transcendence happens when the narrative of the mind stops, when the story of your life, all of the ideas of what you're supposed to be and who you are, stop mattering. When all of it just becomes a small story in the sea of all possible stories and sensations. When you don't resist your own experience but flow with it, you transcend the human because you're not in your ego anymore. And this is what transcendence is. It is freedom to be yourself without this little voice pulling and pushing you around, trying to make existence into something it is not. Transcendence is being present in the body without trying to be somebody else. Because the thing that is trying is what's keeping you from transcendence. It's the thing that must be transcended by looking inward. Depending on what person you are, different approaches will work better for you, and what type of therapist or teacher might help you to move through these experiences. You can see the way I teach or the way I think about life in these very spiritual, psychological, and philosophical terms. There are many ways to make this happen that helps you overcome this suffering. And depending on what person you are, different approaches might work well for you. Some people try psychedelics and it doesn't help them. Some people try therapy and it doesn't help them. And for some, all of these do help a lot. I know for me is that I really excel at being both spiritual, philosophical, and rational at the same time. And this is what makes my approach unique, because I can swim in the paradox of it all. And I understand that this desire of seeking that is very much in the head or intellectual, what actually just points to the emotional reality of what you are. So if this is where you are, I work with people through this. Links below. But at the end, all approaches lead to the same place. You just need to believe that you can actually reach there. And what you find through deep self-understanding is actual death. Not biological death, not physical death, but actual death. The death that your mind is really longing for.